If you've clicked on my video, you're probably already familiar with what this is, or what this is a model of. It's, but if not, I'll explain it briefly. This is a Roman dodecahedron, or dodecahedron. And dodecahedron means basically that it's a 10-sided figure. But this replica is of a type that's been found all over Europe since the 18th century. About 130 of them have been found. They're made usually in most often in a copper alloy, like a brass or bronze. They're cast. I believe they were lost wax cast, sand cast. They are about this size. Some are smaller. And they go up a couple of inches larger than this, apparently. This is about, I think it's about 3.5, 4 inches across, the body of it. Then they have these knobs, and each side, describes a pentagon, so you have five knobs to each side. And one of the most curious things about it is they have these different size holes. And the holes always vary. I think they vary on each item. It's not like they're regular, like two different dodecahedrons will have the same holes in it, or the same size holes. Another curious thing about it is that there are no numbers or lettering of any kind explaining what, or giving a clue to what it might be. So there are many theories about what they might be. Obviously, I've given mine away with the title and the picture, but I believe it's basically simply a lampstand. I'll explain why. But first, to go into a few of the other theories. One of the best ones, I think, is that it's some kind of a knitting device, that you use these knobs to attach your yarn, and you can make different size, fingers for a glove. There's a woman who has a really excellent theory with wire, where she braids wires, which look very similar to wires that have been found in Roman settlements. And that's the thing; these are considered Roman, and they've been found in Roman settlements. Actually, between about they're dated to about between 200 and 400 CE, because of the context of where they've been found. Another theory is that they're kind of a surveying device where you sight through the holes to an object of known length, and then you'll know the distance. The problem with that: no numbers, no letters. You wouldn't know what size hole you're looking through, and again, they all vary. Also, it's been said that it could be a type of device for like a calendar, like a gnomon, or sundial to tell the time of day or the month of the year. Again, no numbers, which would make that difficult. A coin sorter, because different size coins, and to make sure that nobody is scraped down the side of coins, which was apparently a common practice in the past. You could size coins. One was found in a coin hoard, apparently, too. And so on. There's also the idea it's a candle holder, which in a way is similar to my idea, that for different size candles, but they kind of always flop around because you have different size holes top and bottom. I don't think that necessarily follows then. And another one is that it's a cup holder. And I don't know that that makes any practical sense, that you'd want the thing to hold your cup. I mean, why would you want that? At any rate, any theory as to what these are should explain all of the features of it in some plausible way. And so it should explain, any theory should explain why there's no numbers on it, or at least allow for that. And it should explain why it has all of these different size holes, why it has the knobs. Also the error it's in, generally the size of it, and so on. It should be able to explain that. And also it's said that it should explain the similarities. I don't know if this necessarily follows, but it should explain its similarities to this object here. This is my model of an icosahedron. Icosahedron's got 20 sides, knobs, and so it has similarities to the dodecahedron. But And these again, I was only able to find one picture of these online. It's in a museum in Germany, which I'll link to below and also show. I think my theory has a connection to that. You could, make a argument for it having a connection to this. Anyway, which I'll show later also, of course. So to begin with, another thing, it should also explain why this doesn't appear in literature. It said, it doesn't, there's no descriptions of this in literature. In fact, I'll link below Stephen Milo's excellent video. He used the same model here. This model can be found at Etsy at Ancient 3D Crafts, and I'll also link that below. And Stephen Milo uses this same model. I think it's one of the best ones out there, reasonably priced. It's actually accurate to one of the ones on the market. So Mr. Milo explains that these do not appear in literature. And it occurred to me when I was hearing that, and I've heard that before, how do we know it doesn't appear in literature? It could just be that it does, but it's just either described by something that we don't think describes what we see here today, or by some other very common term, such as, in my case, it would be stand for lampstand, or lamp, which was like one of the terms is lumen, I guess the old Latin phrase for stand. Stand also, the word itself is stow. So, are lamps described in literature all the time? Would the person have described the stand it was on? Maybe not. So maybe it's hiding in plain sight in literature. And also, the term candelabrum for a lampstand usually means a longer stand, but I'm not sure. It may describe the shorter ones too. I'm not sure on that. A little bit of a loose end there. But in any case, for my theory, okay, number one, does it make practical sense? Would you use this as a lampstand? Well, here's an example of the very common, at the time, for centuries, people lit their houses with these or ate their meals by them, played games probably by them, and all that. It's basically clay, terracotta, fired clay, with a wick coming out of a little nozzle and a hole in it that takes usually olive oil, although other oils could be used. And it fits. They fit. You could fit different ones in, different sizes. This one just sits on top. It has a bit of a belly, but this one doesn't really hit the pins, but the knobs or whatever on it. But basically, it fits. Now, does it make practical sense to do this? I think it does, first of all, because you, rather than eat your meal or whatever with these sitting on the table, which you could also do, and they do have flat bottoms, sometimes they have round bottoms, but it would make sense to get it up off your surface because you'd want to cast light down on the things better, a little better. It's a little more efficient, in other words. And of course, we've all done this probably. I know when I'm camping, I raise the camping lamp up somewhere so it'll cast down. And also, it would insulate your table from the heat of the lamp. These get very hot, fairly hot. There's actually a scene in Ovid's Metamorphosis where the hot oil from one of these is spilled on a sleeping gentleman, and he's waken up by the heat. So you have some heat insulation, and you end up raising it above the surface for casting the light down on your whatever you're doing, hanging out. So it's not just me saying that. I was curious and I looked to see if there's some precedent, and that's number two. Is there a precedent for using a bronze or brass or other material lamp? And it turns out, lampstand, and it turns out that there is. It was actually a common thing. So here's an example of a lampstand. It's being used with a bronze lamp, as it turns out, but in many descriptions I see that it's said that clay lamps too would often be put in a stand of some kind. So you had these And then also bronze stands. You also had bronze stands for, simpler, like wire stands for these. But it was very common to have decorative lampstands. Then there's the taller one, the candelabrum, which was also showing that people desired to raise their lamp even higher, like in a room to cast light, on the floor and around it, a little bit higher. So there's a precedence for it. It's not like this wasn't done. It was done, and it was done with cast brass and bronze, lampstands of all different types. So I think it makes practical sense. Plus, we know that whether or not, one argues, oh, it's not practical. No, well, it was done. But then we have the issue number 3 of the holes. Like, how would you explain the holes? Now, at first, I was wondering about that, and I've looked at many of these on the internet, many of these clay lamps, and some of them, like I say, have either smaller round bottoms or they have deeper bellies. And I thought, well, maybe to make them fit better into one of these, if you had a shallower one, it might hit the opening, but you might choose a different hole, to make it fit better. But honestly, I think that's a little bit thin. I don't know that we'd do that. Why not then just make them all with like one big hole, like the biggest hole in these. So then I was looking around the internet and I found another kind of lamp that I think may explain the different size holes. And that is this. Well, here's a picture of what these were. This is a glass lamp. Well, mine is a plastic model that I made proportionately to the bottoms of several of these, kind of averaging them out. And the way these worked was that you can actually pick one of these to fit much more closely, which makes a very stable support for this. And the way this sort of lamp worked was that you would put olive oil in it, your burning oil, your fuel, or you would put water and then olive oil, which floats neatly on the top, so if you just had a thin layer of olive oil, and then you put a floating wick in it. So people would have this kind of lamp also in their home, and it's accepted today that these use some sort of holder. They could be on a wall sconce, other unnamed holders that you would have, whatever, if you wanted it lower, if you wanted it on the table or whatever, and presumably high stands like the candelabra. So we know that these use some sort of stand. And I wondered if that could explain the hole sizes here, because they seem to always have some sort of point on the bottom. And of course you can't just put it anywhere. Well then, if you wanted a secure support, why not use one of these? See, in this case then, a manufacturer of these might be wanting to cover a wider set of customers who might use a clay lamp, might use a glass lamp, and that way they would make it kind of, multi-purpose. They'd put all these different size holes in it, and then depending on, the habits of your personal glass blower, you can find one that would fit. And then even further than that, I discovered yet another type of glass lamp. And here again is an illustration of one that was sold at auction. This particular one I made, again, from polymer, and it's actually an oil lamp. It's similar type, I don't know, it's a floating lamp, I'm not sure what they call it exactly, but other than floating wick lamp. And I've used this one and it works. There's lamps of this type, just kind of like a cone, apparently were used for hundreds of years, even thousands of years. When you go, they found 3 of these in King Tut's tomb, in fact, carved out of alabaster. And they'd have oil again and a floating wick. Well, if you look at this, like, you can pick a hole to set it in that works best for you, that makes it the most stable. You'd be able to do that. And then if the next one you got after you broke this one, you basically might be thinner, it might be thicker. You could go out to a different size hole. But it makes a very nice sturdy, it just wedges in there nicely. It just makes a very nice sturdy lampstand for this type of glass lamp. So that basically is my theory for the holes, okay? That it's for different sized, glass lamps. But back to the icosahedron. The icosahedron. Then what about this guy? Now, if you do accept that any theory for this should explain this, doesn't necessarily follow entirely that case. Here's an interesting thing about this. When I made this model, and I made it to, I could not find the dimensionists. I wrote the museum, they didn't get back to me, but AI tells me this is about 8 centimeters across, 80 millimeters across. When you build one of these, as I did, making the knobs of approximately equal size, the geometry of it is such that there's a slight slant, and you can pick your slant. It's the same, it just goes in different directions, depending on where which way you place it. Plus mine's a bit irregular because I made this by hand with polymer sheets, and that's a chore. But basically I realized that no matter how you do it, there's a bit of a slant, okay? Now in my model, again being irregular, you can find, places to set it. Okay. But it bothered me that there was this slant. No matter which way you did it, there was always a slant. And then I looked again at the model in the museum, and you'll note that it will have 2 size knobs, small knobs, large knobs, and not seeing the whole thing, I don't really have to, because you can see that the larger ones seem to be approximately correct, so that a person placing the lamp could always find a way to place the large and small knobs so that you ended up with a level surface. Another thing about it is that the faces of it, although I didn't impress it that much, you can also see that the faces are concave. And also the edges are concave, which again might explain a deep-bellied lamp, like you would be able to use a very, with the deep belly of the reservoir of a lamp would still fit in your icosahedron lamp holder, if that's what it is. So that might explain that. But then people say, well, what about the holes? Well, your dodecahedron has the holes. This doesn't have the holes. How would you explain that? Well, possibly a person who is purchasing one of these as a lampstand wouldn't be ever purchasing this sort of lamp. They're not interested because they don't use it. They only use this. That's what they always use. So they don't want the holes. It would be like similar to a person who always makes bread and bagels, but they never make pizza bagels. So they don't purchase a toaster oven. They just purchase the toaster. And there's many examples of that where you might want something with extra features, and you might know you're never going to use them. In conclusion, I feel that my theory as to the use of the mysterious dodecahedron makes practical sense. It has some precedence. I believe it explains the holes. It gives a purposeful, possible reason why it has the irregular sized holes in it. It fits the era, it fits the size, it fits a practical purpose. So that's my take on it. I think I've got a plausible theory here, and I'd love to hear what other people think.